The sun rose over the Utah Valley on a seemingly ordinary Thursday morning, the kind of morning where students walked across campus thinking about their next lecture, coffee in hand, backpacks slung lazily over shoulders. The birds chirped, the wind whispered through the trees, and life moved at its usual pace. But for Charlie Kirk, that morning would never be ordinary. By 11:52 a.m., the routine of the day shattered, leaving a wake of chaos, grief, and unanswered questions. How does someone so public, so outspoken, so in the center of political attention, suddenly vanish from the safety of the world we think we know? And why did it happen here, in a place where students once laughed freely and professors lectured without fear? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. This story isn't just about a man who was killed. It's about the unraveling of everything we thought we understood about safety, influence, and the unforeseen danger that hides behind the familiar. 36 hours have passed since that fateful moment, and yet, the mystery of what really happened to Charlie Kirk continues to grow. Authorities are scrambling, the public is on edge, and each new development seems to raise more questions than answers. It's a story that has gripped Utah, captured national attention, and now, it is the story that you need to hear. Because the truth, when it comes out, isn't going to be comfortable. It isn't going to make sense at first glance. And it certainly isn't going to be what anyone expected. It began innocuously enough. Students were making their way across Utah Valley University's campus, unaware that the day would end in tragedy. The morning sunlight reflected off the glass windows of the Losi Center, glinting like a warning no one could see. Cameras, security personnel, and casual bystanders captured fragments of what would soon be pieced together into a chilling timeline. At precisely 11:52 a.m., a person, later identified as the suspect, arrived on campus. The events that followed would mark the beginning of one of the most intense manhunts in recent Utah history. Authorities immediately knew they were dealing with a calculated act. The suspect moved through the area in a way that suggested forethought, not randomness. Surveillance cameras caught him walking through residential streets near the university, then entering the campus with an air of purpose. Witnesses would later describe the scene as surreal, almost cinematic in its precision and horror. And yet, despite the recordings, despite the thousands of tips pouring into the FBI, the answer to a simple question, who killed Charlie Kirk, remained frustratingly out of reach. As the news broke, the weight of the tragedy pressed down on everyone connected to Charlie Kirk. His family, friends, colleagues, and even those who disagreed with him politically felt the sting of loss and confusion. Erica Kirk, his wife, was reportedly in disbelief, struggling to comprehend how life could change so violently and suddenly. Officials, including Utah Governor Spencer Cox, urged the public to come forward with any information that might lead to the suspect's capture. Cox emphasized that investigators cannot do our job without the public's help right now. The message was urgent. The stakes were high. Every tip, every observation, every clue mattered. The response from the public was overwhelming. The FBI reported receiving more than 7,000 leads in the days following the shooting, with investigators conducting nearly 200 interviews to follow up on every potential detail. Each lead brought a glimmer of hope, a chance to close the case. Yet each also raised more questions. How could someone plan such an attack in broad daylight on a university campus? Why target Charlie Kirk specifically? And what, if anything, could have prevented this from happening? Video footage played a central role in the investigation. CNN released clips showing a person matching the suspect's description walking near the campus, moving in a way that seemed deliberate yet calm. One clip, in particular, showed the suspect fleeing the roof of a campus building, heading into a wooded area. Investigators believe that the suspect left behind potential DNA evidence, a critical piece of the puzzle. Yet, as precise as the technology can be, there remained an unsettling ambiguity. Footage shows a figure, a set of movements, but it cannot reveal intention. It cannot reveal motive. And it cannot reveal the full story that Charlie Kirk's death left behind. Adding to the intrigue were eyewitness accounts that painted a complex picture of the suspect's behavior. A student reported seeing a man on or near the roof of the Losi Center on 2 separate occasions over the past 2 weeks. The student described the behavior as weird, noting that even a professor had called out to ask if the man was okay. These seemingly minor observations took on new significance in light of the attack. Could these earlier sightings have been a warning? Or were they merely coincidences, overlooked until it was too late? It's a question that investigators, and now the public, are grappling with. In the midst of the manhunt, national attention descended on the story. The Trump administration, recognizing the gravity of the situation, offered support. Vice President J.D. Vance and Second Lady Usha Vance personally escorted Erica Kirk and her husband's casket from Salt Lake City to Phoenix on Air Force Two. The image of the Second Lady holding Erica's hand as they disembarked was both poignant and heart-wrenching. President Donald Trump announced plans to award Charlie Kirk a posthumous Presidential Medal of Freedom and expressed his intention to attend the funeral. These gestures,
nice to meet you,
while
Anonymous.
symbolic
Thank
of
you. Nice to
honor
meet-
and recognition, also underscored the far-reaching impact of this tragedy, turning a local event into a national moment of mourning. For the average observer, the combination of political prominence, campus tragedy, and forensic investigation might seem overwhelming. Yet each element is interconnected. Each piece of footage, each witness statement, and each tip from the public forms a thread in a narrative that is slowly being woven together. And the more we dig into the details, the clearer it becomes that Charlie Kirk's death is more than a simple act of violence. It is a story of planning, obsession, and perhaps motives that go far beyond what anyone initially imagined. But what makes this case even more compelling and terrifying is the uncertainty that lingers. Despite the massive mobilization of law enforcement and the torrent of public tips, the suspect remains at large. Theories abound. Was it someone with a personal vendetta? A politically motivated attack? Or was this a random, senseless act of violence, a convergence of opportunity and malevolence? Every theory seems plausible, yet each leaves unanswered questions. And in that ambiguity lies the tension, the drama, and the gripping pull that has captivated the nation. As the investigation unfolds, one thing is certain: the story is far from over. New footage could surface, tips might lead to unexpected breakthroughs, and the human stories, the grief, the shock, the fear, will continue to unfold. The clock is ticking, and every passing hour adds urgency to the manhunt. For those following the story, the stakes are clear. The truth must be uncovered, justice must be served, and lessons must be learned to prevent such tragedies in the future. And yet, for all the meticulous work of investigators, the heroism of law enforcement, and the compassion of family and leaders alike, the most shocking revelation about Charlie Kirk's death is still to come. Something hidden in the shadows, something that not even the surveillance footage can fully reveal, is waiting to emerge. What exactly happened on that roof? Who was the person walking in the shadows before the shooting? And what secret might the suspect be hiding that could alter everything we think we know about this case? What would you do if the world changed in less than a minute? Imagine walking across campus, the sun warm on your face, the chatter of friends around you. And then, suddenly, everything you thought was safe and predictable disappears. That's exactly the morning Utah Valley University's campus experienced. That Thursday morning began like any other, but by 11:52 a.m., it had become a moment seared into history, one that would haunt students, faculty, and the nation alike. Charlie Kirk arrived at the campus as he had countless times before, moving with purpose, a schedule tight, every detail of his day accounted for. What he could not anticipate was the presence of someone lurking nearby, someone watching, waiting, someone with intentions no one could yet fathom. Video footage obtained by investigators shows a figure moving through residential streets toward the campus, a calmness in their steps that belied the chaos about to unfold. And as the minutes ticked closer to 11:52, tension thickened like a storm cloud on the horizon. Students were scattered across the campus, rushing to classes, meeting friends for coffee, discussing upcoming assignments. Professors stood at the edges of lecture halls, greeting students and checking notes. It was a scene of normalcy, of everyday life. And yet, under the surface, something was off. One student, who would later recount the events to CNN, mentioned seeing a man on or near the roof of the Losi Center multiple times over the past 2 weeks. The student called the behavior weird, noting that even a professor had approached to ask if the man was okay. At the time, it seemed like an oddity, a curiosity, something easily dismissed. But hindsight would reveal those moments as ominous warnings, threads in a tapestry of premeditated violence. Authorities believe that the suspect arrived on campus at exactly 11:52 a.m., moving toward the Losi Center with an unhurried but deliberate pace. Security cameras, strategically positioned across the campus, captured his movements, each frame a puzzle piece in a larger, more terrifying picture. The figure is calm, almost methodical, a stark contrast to the panic and fear that would soon grip everyone on campus. And then, in a moment that would change everything, the first shots rang out. The sound was abrupt, jarring, and piercing. Chaos erupted instantly. Students screamed, some ducking behind benches, others running aimlessly, searching for safety. Professors grabbed for their phones, calling for help, while campus security moved to contain the situation. The images, still being pieced together, show a scene of disarray, backpacks thrown aside, chairs overturned, phones abandoned in the scramble. The normal rhythm of life was gone, replaced by a shockwave of terror. Eyewitnesses described seeing the suspect fleeing to the roof of the building, then vanishing into a wooded area nearby. Investigators believe that the suspect left behind traces of DNA, potentially crucial evidence that could lead to an arrest. Yet, even with this evidence, the manhunt became increasingly complex. How does someone vanish so quickly after committing such a bold act? And more importantly, why? In the midst of the chaos, the human element becomes impossible to ignore. Students who had been mere feet away from the shooting spoke of fear, confusion, and guilt. One student told reporters that they froze, unable to move, paralyzed by the shock of witnessing something so incomprehensible. Another mentioned helping a classmate who had fallen, trying to drag them to safety while bullets rang out in the distance. These moments, these individual stories, reveal the profound human cost of a single act of violence. It's not just about statistics or surveillance footage. It's about lives forever altered in an instant. But it wasn't only the students who were affected. Campus staff, maintenance workers, and professors found themselves thrust into roles they never anticipated. Security protocols were activated, doors locked, alarms blared. Emergency services poured onto campus within minutes, their sirens piercing the air, their presence a lifeline amid the chaos. Police coordinated with federal authorities, the FBI mobilizing to provide immediate support. Tips and leads started flooding in almost immediately, each piece of information meticulously logged, analyzed, and cross-referenced. Yet, even with thousands of eyes and ears on the case, the puzzle remained unsolved. Outside the immediate scene, the world began to react. Social media exploded with posts from students, faculty, and local residents, sharing first-hand accounts and unverified footage. News outlets scrambled to cover the story, broadcasting images of the campus, interviews with witnesses, and statements from law enforcement. The narrative began to take shape, but even as the world watched, one critical fact remained elusive: the identity and motive of the suspect. Governor Spencer Cox, recognizing the urgency of the situation, addressed the public with a plea for assistance. "We cannot do our job without the public's help right now," he said, emphasizing the need for anyone with knowledge to come forward. The FBI received over 7,000 tips in the first 36 hours alone, with nearly 200 interviews conducted to follow up on promising leads. Yet, for all the information pouring in, the sense of unease only grew. Every lead brought hope, and then doubt. Every potential sighting raised questions, and each conflicting account added layers of complexity. Adding to the intensity was the political dimension of the story. Charlie Kirk, a figure known nationally for his activism and outspoken views, had supporters and critics alike. His death resonated far beyond Utah, drawing attention from figures such as Vice President J.D. Vance and Second Lady Usha Vance, who personally escorted Erica Kirk and her husband's casket to Phoenix. President Donald Trump announced plans to award Kirk a posthumous Presidential Medal of Freedom and expressed intentions to attend the funeral. The involvement of national leaders underscored the prominence of Kirk's life and the gravity of his death, transforming a local tragedy into a moment of national concern. As the day wore on, The campus remained on high alert. Investigators scoured the area, combing through buildings, reviewing footage, and interviewing anyone who might have seen something critical. Each discovery, each piece of evidence, added both clarity and confusion. The suspect, agile and calculated, had left traces, but they were insufficient to fully reconstruct the events. It was a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, with time pressing against investigators and fear pressing against the campus community. And yet, amid the tragedy and the search for answers, a chilling reality emerged. The person responsible for Charlie Kirk's death was not just someone who acted in the heat of the moment. The suspect had been observed before, moving through spaces in ways that suggested forethought. A man seen on the roof twice over 2 weeks. A figure moving methodically through residential streets. A calm, deliberate presence that escalated to violence without warning. Each observation painted a portrait of someone more dangerous than initially imagined, and each unanswered question became a source of growing dread. The events of that morning left an indelible mark. Students who survived would carry the memory for the rest of their lives. Professors and staff would recount the fear, the confusion, the moments when split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. And the public, watching from afar, grappled with the shock of how easily violence could pierce the ordinary, turning a routine day into a nightmare. But what happened next would turn this story from a local tragedy into a national mystery. As investigators delved deeper into surveillance footage, witness reports, and forensic evidence, they began uncovering discrepancies. Small details that didn't add up, pieces of the puzzle that suggested something far more sinister than anyone had anticipated. Who exactly was the suspect? Why did he choose that time, that place, that victim? And what, if anything, had been missed in the days leading up to the attack? The answers were starting to surface, but they were not comforting. They hinted at planning, obsession, and a level of premeditation that raised questions about safety, awareness, and human behavior. And as authorities pieced together the timeline, one undeniable truth emerged. The morning of chaos was only the beginning. What came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The chaos of that Thursday morning didn't stop when the shots rang out. If anything, it only magnified the urgency that gripped Utah Valley University and the surrounding community. As sirens echoed across the campus, a coordinated manhunt sprang into motion. An operation so vast and meticulous that it would dominate headlines and social media feeds for days. But behind the organized flurry of law enforcement activity, one haunting question lingered. How do you catch someone who has already vanished into thin air? By the time campus security confirmed the death of Charlie Kirk, local police and federal authorities were already converging on the scene. Officers blocked access to surrounding streets, and the area around the Losi Center became a cordoned-off perimeter of blue lights and caution tape. Investigators combed the ground for physical evidence, anything that might give them a lead on the suspect. Bullets were recovered, shell casings cataloged, and security camera footage analyzed frame by frame. But even with these pieces of the puzzle, the suspect remained elusive. It was as if he had been swallowed by the very city he had walked through just moments earlier. Governor Spencer Cox, sensing both the gravity and the potential peril of a fugitive on the loose, addressed the public in a press conference. His voice was steady, but the words carried an unshakable weight. We need the community's help. The public is critical to this investigation. If you saw anything at all, please come forward. We cannot do this alone. The governor's statement was more than a formality. It was a plea for collective vigilance. Tips began flooding in immediately, ranging from vague sightings to highly specific details about the suspect's movements. Each tip was cataloged, cross-referenced, and vetted, creating an ever-growing web of leads. The FBI, called in to provide federal support, immediately mobilized a specialized task force. Agents with experience in violent crimes and manhunts converged on the area, sharing information with local police in real time. Over 7,000 tips poured into the Bureau within the first 36 hours alone. Each lead was examined carefully, some promising, some dead ends, and some chillingly precise. Nearly 200 interviews were conducted with individuals who might have encountered the suspect, witnesses who saw unusual activity, and people who may have been in proximity to Charlie Kirk prior to the attack. The sheer scale of the operation revealed the complexity and seriousness of the investigation. And then there was the surveillance footage, the most critical piece of the puzzle so far. CNN obtained video showing a figure matching the suspect's description walking through a residential area near the university. Calm, deliberate, moving as if he belonged. The footage suggested premeditation. Investigators believe this is when the suspect scouted his target, identified the optimal route, and positioned himself for the attack. Later footage shows him fleeing from the roof of the campus building and disappearing into the wooded area nearby. Analysts believe the suspect may have left traces of DNA behind, a key factor that could eventually lead to an arrest, but for now, his identity remained unknown. Authorities faced a chilling reality. The suspect had been seen before. A student recounted witnessing a man wandering on the roof of the Losi Center twice in the prior 2 weeks. The student described his behavior as weird, and even a professor had noticed and approached him, asking if he was okay. At the time, it seemed like an oddity, just another stranger on campus. But in retrospect, these sightings painted a terrifying picture of surveillance, patience, and intent. Someone had been watching, planning, and waiting. Amid this mounting tension, law enforcement faced immense pressure, not just to find the suspect, but to prevent further tragedy. Police and federal agents coordinated meticulously, establishing search perimeters, employing K-9 units, and canvassing neighborhoods near the university. Every alleyway, wooded area, and rooftop became a potential hiding spot. Authorities also relied on the public, urging anyone with information to come forward. Tips ranged from neighbors' accounts of unusual visitors to students who noticed suspicious behavior. Some tips led to dead ends, while others hinted at a larger story that authorities were only beginning to unravel. Meanwhile, the human impact of the event deepened. Families of students and faculty scrambled to confirm the safety of their loved ones. Anxiety and fear gripped the community. Social media posts reflected both panic and confusion, students sharing screenshots of emergency alerts, parents posting desperate messages, and news outlets broadcasting live updates from the scene. In this environment, misinformation spread almost as fast as official reports, forcing law enforcement to clarify details repeatedly. Each clarification, each new report, heightened both tension and curiosity. The manhunt was not limited to Utah Valley University. Investigators considered the possibility that the suspect might have fled further afield. Roadblocks were set up, neighboring counties alerted, and airports monitored for any signs of unusual travel. Authorities worked tirelessly, conducting vehicle checks, following digital footprints, and examining financial records. Every angle, no matter how unlikely, was explored. The suspect's ability to vanish so quickly raised critical questions. Did he have help? Did he plan an escape route in advance? Was this an isolated act or part of a larger network? Each unanswered question added to the fear gripping the public. As the day turned into night, the manhunt intensified. Drones flew overhead, their cameras scanning the terrain with infrared technology. K-9 units navigated wooded areas, searching for scents that could lead them to the fugitive. Police helicopters illuminated the campus with powerful spotlights, but the suspect remained elusive. For every lead that seemed promising, another trail went cold. Investigators had to adapt constantly, adjusting tactics based on new information and shifting circumstances. Amid this tense and urgent atmosphere, the question of motive loomed large. Why would someone target Charlie Kirk specifically? What did they hope to achieve? While Kirk was a public figure known for activism and strong political opinions, the randomness of the attack suggested a deeper, more personal layer of intent. Some speculated about ideological motives, while others considered the possibility of a personal vendetta. Investigators had to sift through countless scenarios, trying to separate speculation from actionable intelligence. The public's involvement was crucial. Every tip, no matter how small, could be the breakthrough that solved the case. Some tips pointed to local residents who might have seen the suspect in the days leading up to the attack. Others focused on suspicious vehicles, unusual behavior near campus, or online activity linked to potential suspects. Authorities emphasized that even seemingly trivial details could provide critical insights. Each lead, each observation, became a piece of the puzzle that could ultimately uncover the person responsible. By the second day of the manhunt, the scale of the operation was staggering. More than 200 interviews had been conducted, surveillance footage analyzed, and forensic evidence collected. Yet, for all the efforts, the suspect remained at large. His ability to disappear so quickly and efficiently raised alarm bells, forcing investigators to consider that he might have planned escape routes, safe houses, or even external assistance. The complexity of the investigation underscored the seriousness of the crime and the stakes involved. And as the nation watched, political figures weighed in, highlighting both the prominence of Charlie Kirk and the gravity of the situation. Vice President J.D. Vance and Second Lady Usha Vance personally escorted Erica Kirk and her husband's casket to Phoenix aboard Air Force Two, a symbolic gesture reflecting the nation's mourning. President Donald Trump announced plans to posthumously award Charlie Kirk the Presidential Medal of Freedom and expressed intentions to attend the funeral, further drawing national attention to the tragedy. This political dimension added layers of complexity to the manhunt, as authorities balanced investigative priorities with public interest and media scrutiny. But even with national attention, the investigation faced daunting challenges. The suspect's previous sightings on campus suggested premeditation, yet investigators still struggled to identify him. Witness statements sometimes conflicted, surveillance footage was limited in scope, and digital evidence required painstaking analysis. For every promising lead, new questions emerged. Who was this person? What had they done before? And most importantly, what were they planning next? As night fell on Utah Valley, law enforcement remained relentless. The streets were patrolled, neighborhoods scanned, and tips followed. Every sound, movement, and shadow was scrutinized. Authorities knew that time was critical. The longer the suspect remained at large, the greater the risk of another incident. And while investigators worked tirelessly, the community endured sleepless nights, grappling with fear, anxiety, and grief. But the twists in this story were only beginning. In the early hours of the following morning, a new lead surfaced, something that investigators hadn't anticipated, a detail that would change the course of the manhunt. This tip, seemingly small at first glance, would soon provide the breakthrough needed to narrow down the suspect's identity. And as authorities acted on this new information, the scale of what they were uncovering became clear. The attack on Charlie Kirk was not a random act, but part of a calculated plan that extended further than anyone had imagined. The manhunt was accelerating, urgency at every step. But what investigators were about to discover next would shock the nation and turn a local tragedy into a case of national intrigue. Every question that had been asked, every tip that had been followed, was about to intersect with evidence so compelling it would rewrite everything we thought we knew. And in the shadows of this unfolding investigation, one haunting reality emerged. The suspect was still out there, watching, moving, and waiting. The hunt was far from over, and the next revelation would leave everyone questioning not only who was responsible, but why it had happened in the first place. If you've ever watched a crime scene unfold on TV, it looks almost cinematic. Flashing lights, reporters swarming the perimeter, helicopters circling overhead. But reality is different. In Utah Valley, it was messy, tense, and unpredictable. Every second mattered. Every piece of evidence, every tip from the public, could be the difference between catching a killer and letting them vanish into thin air. And the most promising evidence was right there, captured on silent cameras that had been observing the campus long before anyone realized what was about to happen. Investigators immediately honed in on surveillance footage, and what they found was chilling. The first clips showed a figure walking along the residential streets near Utah Valley University, blending in with pedestrians, yet moving with a singular purpose. The man's gait, the way he surveyed the surroundings, it was calculated. He wasn't wandering aimlessly. He was a predator on a mission, and the cameras had captured every step. Investigators compared his movements to those reported by the student and professor who had seen him on the roof of the Losi Center in prior weeks. The dots began to connect. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was meticulously planned. The video evidence provided more than just confirmation of the suspect's presence. It gave a timeline. Authorities determined that the suspect had arrived on campus at precisely 11:52 a.m., the exact moment leading up to the shooting. The footage showed him entering the campus quietly, then making his way toward the roof of the Losi Center. Each movement was deliberate, almost rehearsed. Security analysts meticulously studied the angles, frames, and timing. Every detail mattered. The way he avoided cameras in certain areas, the moments he paused to look around, the path he chose to approach his eventual target. These were the movements of someone who knew exactly what he was doing, and who had likely studied the campus for weeks. But the breakthrough didn't stop there. Later footage captured the suspect fleeing the roof after the shooting, moving quickly toward a wooded area adjacent to the campus. Investigators noted that the suspect may have left behind DNA evidence, a potentially game-changing piece of information. Forensic teams swarmed the location, collecting anything that could link the fugitive to the crime. Hair samples, fibers, and other biological material were cataloged and sent for analysis. This painstaking work would take days, but it offered a glimmer of hope, a tangible trail that could finally lead to an arrest. Every witness who had seen the suspect before the attack became critical. Students recounted noticing him in unusual places. Professors remembered interactions that now seemed ominous, and campus staff recalled moments that, in hindsight, were impossible to ignore. One student told CNN, "I saw him on the roof twice in the last 2 weeks. At the time, I thought he was just some guy wandering around. Now, I realize he was watching, maybe even waiting." The weight of hindsight pressed on everyone who had crossed paths with the mysterious man, turning ordinary encounters into clues in a deadly puzzle. Meanwhile, law enforcement faced the enormous challenge of coordinating all incoming tips. The FBI received over 7,000 leads, some trivial, some crucial, and had to determine which were credible. Every phone call, every email, every sighting had to be logged, verified, and cross-checked against other evidence. It was an exhaustive process, with agents working around the clock to ensure nothing was overlooked. And with every new lead, the pressure mounted. The suspect was still at large, and the possibility of another attack weighed heavily on everyone involved. The political and social implications of the case also came into play. Vice President J.D. Vance and Second Lady Usha Vance personally escorted Erica Kirk and her husband's casket to Phoenix aboard Air Force Two. The Second Lady held Kirk's hand as they disembarked, a gesture that underscored the gravity of the loss and the nation's mourning. President Donald Trump announced plans to award Charlie Kirk a posthumous Presidential Medal of Freedom and declared his intention to attend the funeral. This high-profile involvement drew national attention, amplifying the urgency of the investigation and placing an extraordinary spotlight on Utah's law enforcement agencies. For investigators, the stakes were clear. Catching the suspect wasn't just about justice. It was about preventing further tragedy. The surveillance footage offered both insight and urgency. It revealed a person who had meticulously planned his actions, who had studied the campus, and who had executed his plan with chilling precision. Each frame of video was analyzed, freeze-framed, and enhanced in the lab, revealing small but critical details: a bag, a jacket, the suspect's stride. Investigators compared these observations to witness descriptions, creating a composite profile that could eventually lead to identification. The community felt the weight of the ongoing manhunt. Parents and students remained on edge, double-checking routines and safety procedures. Social media buzzed with updates, some accurate, some speculative, some outright false. Authorities had to constantly address misinformation while ensuring that legitimate tips reached the right channels. Every new post, every viral video, became another layer in a complex narrative that investigators had to navigate carefully. By the second night, authorities had expanded their search perimeter beyond the immediate campus area. Officers patrolled nearby neighborhoods, checking for suspicious activity. K-9 units scoured wooded areas where the suspect had been seen fleeing. Helicopters hovered overhead, their searchlights cutting through darkness and fog. Digital forensics teams worked on extracting data from public cameras, traffic sensors, and potential mobile phone connections. The operation had become massive, high-stakes, and relentless. Yet even with these resources, the suspect remained elusive. It was as if he had melted into the city, leaving no trace beyond the grainy surveillance footage and the small, tangible pieces of evidence collected at the scene. Every day, without an arrest, increased anxiety, fueled speculation and added pressure on investigators. Were they looking for a lone perpetrator or someone with outside assistance? Did he have a plan to evade capture long-term? These questions haunted every briefing, every strategy session, and every officer on the ground. Then came the subtle breakthrough. A pattern began to emerge. Investigators noticed that the suspect's movements were consistent with someone familiar with the campus layout. Certain paths he took, locations he avoided, and places he paused suggested prior knowledge, possibly gained from weeks of observation or even insider familiarity. This realization shifted the investigation from a random chase to a more targeted hunt. They weren't just looking for a stranger. They were looking for someone who had spent time planning and strategizing. The analysis of the footage also revealed behavioral clues. The suspect's posture, head movements, and timing of steps indicated a level of nervous energy mixed with calculated caution. Experts in criminal profiling were called in to interpret these subtle signs. Every glance, every pause, every hesitation became data points in a profile designed to narrow down suspects. This psychological dimension added another layer of complexity to the manhunt, combining technology, human observation, and instinct in the race to apprehend a dangerous individual. And yet, despite these advancements, there remained critical unknowns. The motive was still unclear. Was this an ideological attack, a personal vendetta, or something more sinister? Each theory opened new avenues for investigation, but also introduced potential distractions. Investigators had to be cautious, discerning between relevant leads and red herrings. Every decision mattered because the suspect was still free, still moving, and possibly still watching. Amid the tension, human stories unfolded. Campus security officers recounted the panic, students described their fear, and faculty reflected on the surreal nature of the events. One student shared, "It felt like the world slowed down. You see the cops, the lights, but none of it makes sense until you know someone is gone." Charlie Kirk and family members faced their grief under the unrelenting glare of media attention. Their pain was public, yet intimate. Every gesture, every statement, every tear became part of the national conversation surrounding Charlie Kirk's death. As the investigation progressed, authorities realized the importance of connecting with the public. Tips weren't just encouraged, they were essential. Each small observation, a fleeting glance, a momentary interaction, a car parked unusually, could unlock critical leads. Social media campaigns, press briefings, and direct appeals were all part of the strategy. Authorities emphasized, repeatedly, that someone, somewhere, held information that could lead to the suspect's capture. But the clock was ticking. Days turned into nights, and the urgency escalated. Every passing hour increased the risk that the suspect could plan, hide, or even strike again. Law enforcement faced an unprecedented challenge. A person who was patient, methodical, and willing to disappear into the shadows, leaving only traces captured on film. The manhunt had become a race against time, and the pressure weighed heavily on everyone involved. Then, just as hope seemed to hinge entirely on careful analysis of video and tips, a new piece of evidence emerged, a seemingly minor detail overlooked in the first review. It was a movement caught on a secondary camera, almost imperceptible but unmistakable to trained eyes. A hand gesture, a momentary pause, an object left behind. Small, but potentially pivotal. Investigators realized that this overlooked clue might finally be the key to tracking the suspect, providing the breakthrough they desperately needed. And as teams prepared to act on this clue, the gravity of the situation hit home. Charlie Kirk's killer had been walking among them, studying, planning, and executing a plan that had shocked the nation. Now, with the newly discovered evidence, authorities were closer than ever to identifying the person responsible. But with each step forward came a new layer of danger, unpredictability, and suspense. As dawn broke over Utah Valley, investigators huddled in the command center, analyzing every piece of evidence collected from the night before. The newly discovered detail from the secondary camera, a fleeting movement, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, was the spark they needed to ignite the next phase of the investigation. But the question remained, who was this person, and why did they target Charlie Kirk? The stakes were immense. One misstep, one delay, and the suspect could vanish again, leaving a trail of unanswered questions and escalating fear. Law enforcement turned to behavioral analysis, enlisting experts in criminal profiling to construct a psychological portrait of the suspect. Every piece of video, every tip, every witness statement fed into the profile. Analysts looked for patterns in movement, body language, and decision-making. They asked questions that seemed almost philosophical. What drives a person to premeditated violence? How does someone select a target with such precision? How do they maintain composure in the moments that precede an attack? The answers would not only help identify the suspect, but also predict. The profile that began to emerge was chilling. Investigators hypothesized a suspect in his late 20s to mid-30s, someone with prior experience observing or interacting with large groups of people, possibly a student, former student, or someone who had spent considerable time near the university. He displayed a combination of patience, calculated risk-taking, and an unsettling ability to blend in. Experts noted his calm demeanor during surveillance and his deliberate movements, suggesting an individual capable of methodical planning rather than impulsive action. But behavioral analysis was only part of the puzzle. Authorities cross-referenced the profile with missing persons reports, known offenders in the area, and anyone with a history of violent or extremist tendencies. Every database in the state, and even across neighboring states, was scoured for matches. Analysts compared gait patterns, facial structures, and physical characteristics observed in the footage with thousands of individuals. It was a meticulous, time-consuming process, but investigators understood that speed could mean the difference between capture and tragedy. Meanwhile, the community was still reeling. Students returned to campus under heavy police presence, navigating a landscape now layered with grief, fear, and uncertainty. Parents monitored every message and call, their anxieties heightened by the knowledge that the suspect remained at large. Social media amplified every rumor, every sighting, every theory, creating an environment of heightened tension. News outlets provided round-the-clock coverage, balancing factual reporting with the emotional weight of national mourning. Each update became a lifeline, a reassurance, or a new cause for panic. The public's attention, however, was not limited to Utah. Political figures weighed in, adding layers of complexity to an already high-stakes situation. Vice President J.D. Vance and Second Lady Usha Vance had already escorted Erica Kirk in the casket, while President Donald Trump announced posthumous honors and plans to attend the funeral. These gestures, while symbolic, also placed additional scrutiny on the investigation. Authorities had to act not only quickly but flawlessly, balancing operational integrity with the pressures of national attention. Back at the command center, analysts noticed subtle clues in the surveillance footage. The suspect's choice of clothing, the timing of his movements, even the direction of his gaze suggested a familiarity with the environment. These weren't random actions. They were deliberate, calculated, and informed by prior observation. Investigators began theorizing that the suspect had conducted reconnaissance in advance, studying schedules, entry points, and escape routes. Every camera angle and witness account was cross-referenced to map the suspect's likely movements in the days leading up to the attack. At the same time, investigators considered the possibility of digital footprints. Phone records, online activity, and social media interactions were analyzed for patterns that might indicate the suspect's planning or ideology. This work revealed subtle hints: searches for the campus layout, videos of Charlie Kirk's events, and posts referencing similar incidents elsewhere. These digital breadcrumbs painted a picture of someone deeply invested in the act, someone who had moved from online planning to real-world execution. The psychological portrait also revealed potential risk factors. Analysts suggested the suspect might have been motivated by ideological reasons, personal grievances, or a combination of both. His patience, attention to detail, and ability to evade capture indicated a level of sophistication that challenged conventional investigative methods. Law enforcement teams prepared for multiple scenarios: a lone actor, a temporary hiding place, or even accomplices who might aid in escape or concealment. Each scenario required a tailored strategy. Despite the mounting evidence, authorities faced a troubling realization: the suspect remained highly adaptable. Each attempt to trace his movements led to dead ends or misleading clues. Investigators knew they were dealing with someone who understood the implications of surveillance and law enforcement tactics. The suspect had planned for contingencies, making the hunt a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. Every misstep, every assumption, could allow him to disappear entirely. To counter this, investigators intensified efforts, combining traditional policing with technological innovation. Drones surveyed wooded areas, license plate readers monitored key exits, and facial recognition software scanned public spaces. Analysts tracked online chatter for hints, warnings, or boasts. The operation became a multi-layered, nationwide effort, designed to leave no stone unturned. Yet, for all the resources deployed, the suspect's identity remained frustratingly elusive. Amid these developments, the community grappled with a new kind of fear, the fear of the unknown. Students reported heightened anxiety, some avoiding campus entirely, others navigating hallways with heightened alertness. Parents contacted authorities regularly, sharing information about unusual behavior or unidentified individuals. Social media buzzed with speculation, with some posts verging on hysteria. The uncertainty fed the narrative that the suspect was not just physically present, but psychologically omnipresent, a shadow over the campus and the town. Then, as investigators pored over the surveillance footage for the fifth time, a subtle but significant detail emerged. A reflection in a window, nearly imperceptible, showed a glimpse of a distinctive tattoo on the suspect's forearm. Analysts immediately recognized the potential significance, a unique identifier that could lead to a name, a background, and possibly the motive behind the attack. This discovery electrified the investigation. Suddenly, the abstract image in grainy video became tangible, a clue that could crack the case wide open. The discovery triggered a flurry of activity. Local and federal teams scrambled to compare the tattoo to existing databases, social media images, and medical records. Investigators sought assistance from tattoo artists familiar with similar designs, and public appeals were prepared in case the community could provide recognition. The breakthrough created a tangible path forward, a thread that could finally unravel the mystery of the suspect's identity. Yet, even with this development, caution was paramount. Investigators knew that acting too hastily could allow the suspect to disappear again or potentially harm others. Surveillance was intensified, movements were tracked in real time, and backup teams were stationed at strategic locations. Every action was coordinated with military precision, balancing urgency with strategic patience. As the day progressed, investigators also revisited prior leads that had been considered minor. Witness accounts, previously dismissed, were re-examined in light of the new tattoo evidence. Subtle inconsistencies in earlier statements now seemed more meaningful. Every detail, no matter how small, became a potential clue in narrowing down the suspect's identity. And then, just as teams were preparing to act on this breakthrough, new information arrived from an unexpected source. A local resident claimed to have seen someone matching the suspect's description entering a vehicle near the campus early that morning. The tip was vague, but specific enough to warrant immediate attention. Authorities coordinated units to investigate, tracking license plates and vehicle registrations. The race against time intensified. The pressure was immense. Investigators knew they were on the brink of a revelation, yet they also understood the risks. The suspect was cunning, resourceful, and still very much at large. One wrong move could mean losing him entirely. And as the city held its collective breath, authorities prepared for what could be the decisive moment in a case that had captured national attention. But even as the investigation closed in, one chilling thought remained. The suspect was aware they were hunting him. Every action taken by law enforcement, every tip made public, every roadblock, he would anticipate it. The question loomed. Would they catch him before he vanished completely, or was he always one step ahead, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again? And as night fell over Utah Valley once more, investigators received a piece of information so unexpected it would change the course of the manhunt entirely. A revelation that promised to finally pierce the mystery of the suspect's identity, but one that also hinted at dangers no one had yet imagined. The command center was electric. Analysts had just confirmed something that, until hours ago, had felt almost impossible: a potential match between the tattoo seen in the surveillance footage and a known individual in Utah's law enforcement database. The room buzzed with quiet murmurs, the kind of tension you feel right before an announcement at a presidential press conference. Every investigator leaned in, eyes fixed on the screens displaying side-by-side comparisons of the tattoo and the database image. There it was. Strikingly identical, unmistakably unique. The suspect's identity wasn't immediately released to the public. Authorities needed to verify every detail: his current location, his known associates, his routines, his history. The fear was that premature disclosure could tip him off, sending him into hiding or, worse, prompting another violent act. But internally, law enforcement teams had never been this close to solving the case. They now had a name, a potential motive, and a pathway to capture. Investigators moved quickly to confirm the suspect's identity. They checked property records, vehicle registrations, social media profiles, and any connections to Utah Valley University. Phone records were subpoenaed. Credit card transactions were traced. Every facet of his life became a piece of a sprawling jigsaw puzzle, and suddenly the puzzle was starting to make sense. As details emerged, an unsettling picture formed. The suspect had no prior violent criminal record, at least nothing officially documented. But a series of social media posts and messages suggested a growing fixation with Charlie Kirk. Friends and acquaintances reported increasingly erratic behavior, marked by online rants, obsessive commentary, and suspiciously timed campus visits. Psychologists reviewing the material noted signs of paranoia, obsession, and a potential desire for notoriety. Meanwhile, students on campus noticed heightened security. Barricades were erected, officers patrolled the grounds in visible formations, and drones hovered silently overhead. Professors canceled classes or moved lectures online. Anxiety rippled through the campus as rumors circulated. The suspect had been seen in the area multiple times, and some students even claimed he had interacted with them briefly in ways that felt off. Comments that were friendly on the surface but carried an undertone of menace. For the families of victims, the breakthrough was both relieving and terrifying. Relief that the suspect might soon be in custody. Terror because if he had been capable of killing Charlie Kirk once, what would stop him from striking again if cornered or provoked? The duality of hope and fear became a collective emotional experience, shared not just by the university community, but by the nation following every development. Authorities moved to secure warrants and coordinate a tactical operation. Multiple law enforcement units were mobilized: SWAT teams, K-9 units, FBI behavioral specialists, and local police. Every possible escape route was mapped. Every potential hideout was cataloged. The aim was clear: apprehend the suspect alive, without further loss of life, and collect evidence to ensure a thorough prosecution. But the suspect wasn't passive. Behavioral analysts warned that individuals like him often anticipate patterns in law enforcement response. He had shown signs of meticulous planning, patience, and an ability to adapt. Each movement by authorities had to be unpredictable. Investigators debated every decision: when to announce a lockdown, how to approach the residents, how many officers to deploy. The tension was palpable. Then, a call came in that would shift the operation into high gear. A neighbor reported seeing someone matching the suspect's description leaving a residence in the early hours of the morning. They noted the vehicle, a distinctive model with an unusual modification to the license plate area. This tip, seemingly small, provided a critical lead. Investigators immediately dispatched surveillance units and confirmed that the vehicle matched images from prior footage near Utah Valley University. Simultaneously, digital forensics teams had been analyzing internet traffic and mobile data. They identified a series of logins, pings, and location signals that placed the suspect within a predictable radius. Cross-referencing these data points with the surveillance footage produced a near-perfect timeline of his movements before and after the attack. Investigators now had a temporal map, a sequence of events that could be acted upon with surgical precision. As law enforcement converged on the location, they prepared for multiple scenarios. One involved the suspect barricading himself inside the home. Another considered the possibility of him fleeing into nearby wooded areas, where he could remain hidden for days. Yet another scenario accounted for potential traps or booby traps left to impede pursuit. Every unit knew that preparation, speed, and coordination would be essential to prevent disaster. The human element, however, could not be ignored. Inside the command center, officers studied the suspect's psychological profile, his likely responses under pressure, his potential reactions to confrontation, and his probable next moves. The experts speculated. Would he surrender quietly, attempt to negotiate, or react violently? Would his actions be influenced by perceived injustice, ideological motives, or sheer survival instinct? Each possibility carried consequences for the operation, each misjudgment a potential catastrophe. At the same time, the nation watched with rapt attention. Media outlets provided near-continuous coverage. Social media exploded with speculation, breaking news alerts, and, at times, misinformation. Memes, theories, and rumors spread faster than verified information, creating a whirlwind of digital noise that investigators had to navigate carefully. Every leaked detail risked altering public perception, pressuring law enforcement, and potentially alerting the suspect. Inside the tactical teams, officers ran through rehearsals of the arrest sequence. They coordinated entry points, established communication channels, and anticipated potential resistance. Every member of the team knew the stakes were historic. Capturing a suspect who had evaded detection, who had killed a high-profile individual, and who had become the focus of national attention. There was no room for error. And then the first visual confirmation arrived. A drone feed showed the suspect emerging from a side entrance, cautiously scanning his surroundings. His movements were deliberate, cautious, almost ritualistic. Tactical teams froze on the live feed, analyzing body language, posture, and any sign of aggression. The suspect paused, looked toward the street, and then made a decision that would set the course for the next critical moments. The city held its collective breath as teams moved into position. Officers whispered last-minute instructions, the SWAT leaders signaled readiness, and negotiators prepared their opening statements. Every second was stretched into an eternity as the suspect continued his cautious approach, unaware that the web of law enforcement was closing around him. Suddenly, he paused. Something caught his attention, a flash from a drone camera, the distant hum of a police vehicle. Investigators would later analyze that pause in detail. But at that moment, it was enough to ignite a reaction, subtle but decisive. The suspect moved again, taking a path that was slightly off the expected trajectory, testing the response of the units stationed ahead. And in that single, fleeting moment, one thing became painfully clear. This suspect was not going to surrender quietly. He was calculating, aware, and ready to act on his own terms. The carefully planned arrest sequence teetered on the edge of chaos, and every decision by law enforcement could trigger a cascade of consequences. The situation reached its peak tension as officers readied themselves for confrontation. They knew this was the moment that would define the investigation, the public perception, and possibly the lives of everyone involved. And just as all eyes focused on the suspect, a sudden movement, unexpected, swift, and shocking, shifted the dynamics entirely. What happened next would shock the nation and change everything about the investigation that had seemed so meticulously planned. One unexpected choice, one unpredictable action, would send ripples through the city, the nation, and beyond, leaving everyone wondering, how did it come to this? And who would survive the consequences? Chapter 5 complete. Do you want me to continue with Chapter 6? The confrontation, tactical teams move in next? You said. Giolo. ChatGPT said. Here's Chapter 6. The confrontation, tactical teams move in, picking up directly from the cliffhanger at the end of Chapter 5. The city streets seemed impossibly quiet. Even the usual morning bustle of Utah Valley had faded, replaced by a tense, almost surreal silence. From the command center, every movement of the suspect was being tracked in real time, each step analyzed for intent. Tactical teams were stationed at key points around the building, K-9 units ready, snipers in position, and negotiators poised to speak. It was a scene that looked like it had been ripped from the pages of a thriller novel, but this was real life, and the stakes could not have been higher. The suspect paused at a corner, glancing nervously in multiple directions. His earlier cautious movements were now tinged with desperation. For over an hour, he had been circling, testing the perimeter, gauging the response of law enforcement. He hadn't noticed the officer stationed in the alleyway behind the building. One wrong step, one misjudgment, and everything could explode into violence. Inside the command center, the lead tactical officer whispered into his headset, coordinating simultaneous movements. Teams Alpha and Bravo, move to the flanks. Delta, cover the rear. Wait for my signal, he instructed. Every officer, every unit, was trained for scenarios like this. But training never fully prepares you for the human unpredictability of a desperate suspect. Meanwhile, the negotiators opened their line of communication. A calm, measured voice echoed from a speaker attached to a vehicle parked a few yards away. "This is your chance to resolve this peacefully," one officer said. "You can come out safely. No one needs to get hurt. Just step away from the building." For a moment, silence. Then, the suspect spoke, not words, but a low, muttered sound that suggested frustration, anxiety, maybe anger. He shifted his weight and ducked into a shadowed alcove, moving unpredictably. The officers inside the command center noted every micro-movement, aware that the smallest miscalculation could trigger violence. The K9 handler signaled the dog to stay, maintaining strict control. But the tension was visible. The animal's ears were alert, muscles coiled, ready to spring. The presence of the K9 was both a deterrent and a risk. Any sudden movement could provoke the suspect. Every officer knew that in moments like this, seconds could determine life or death. Then, something unexpected happened. The suspect produced an object from his backpack. At first, it was unclear what it was: a tool? A weapon? A distraction? Cameras caught the glint of metal, and the officers instantly went on high alert. Snipers readied, tactical teams adjusted their positions, and negotiators renewed their calls, trying to buy time. In that brief, heart-stopping moment, the suspect seemed to make a decision. He moved quickly toward a side entrance of the building. Law enforcement units immediately blocked his path, shouting verbal warnings. "Stop! Police! Don't move!" But the suspect did not stop. He bolted, adrenaline propelling him forward with an almost inhuman speed. Officers pursued, some taking cover, others attempting to cut off escape routes. The chase was a chaotic ballet, every move fraught with risk. One wrong decision, one misstep, and lives could be lost in an instant. At the same time, social media feeds were alive with speculation. Residents and students, many watching from rooftops or behind windows, posted live updates. Some described the suspect's movements with incredible detail, unintentionally aiding law enforcement. Others spread misinformation, creating confusion and amplifying fear. The line between spectator and participant blurred, complicating an already volatile situation. Inside the command center, analysts triangulated every piece of incoming data. Surveillance drones provided aerial views, tracking the suspect's every turn. Thermal imaging cameras revealed his movements even in shaded areas. Officers communicated in rapid, clipped sentences. "He's heading to the north stairwell. Delta team, intercept, watch for potential hostiles, maintain perimeter." Minutes stretched into an eternity. The suspect's movements were unpredictable, his behavior erratic. One moment he paused, scanning the area. The next he dashed toward another exit. Tactical teams had to anticipate his actions while maintaining their own safety and avoiding civilian casualties. Every step required split-second decision-making. Every choice could have consequences beyond the immediate moment. Then, the first contact occurred. A tactical officer moved to block the suspect's path near the main stairwell. The suspect hesitated, briefly locking eyes with the officer. It was a standoff in microcosm, neither willing to make the first move, each calculating the other's intentions. Negotiators' voices echoed in the background, calm but firm, offering one last chance for surrender. Suddenly, the suspect lunged. The officer reacted instantly, using training and instinct to subdue him. There was a brief scuffle, tense and chaotic, but over almost as quickly as it began. The suspect was restrained, handcuffed, and carefully moved to a secure position. Tactical teams exhaled collectively. The immediate danger had passed, but the investigation was far from over. As the suspect was escorted out of the building, the cameras captured every detail. The fear in his eyes, the defiance in his posture, the careful movements of officers ensuring no further harm. Questions raced through the minds of everyone watching. Who was he? What drove him to this point? Would justice be served swiftly, or was this only the beginning of a much larger, more complex story? Investigators immediately began questioning the suspect. They sought to understand his motives, his planning, and his potential connections to other individuals. Forensic teams combed the scene for evidence. DNA, fingerprints, digital devices, and any item that could shed light on the sequence of events leading to Charlie Kirk's death. Meanwhile, the public response was overwhelming. News outlets ran live coverage, commentators speculated on motives, and social media erupted with theories ranging from political vendettas to personal grudges. The story dominated headlines, but amidst the noise, the investigators focused on one thing: the truth. And the truth, as it began to emerge, was more disturbing than anyone had anticipated. Interviews with friends, family, and acquaintances painted a portrait of someone deeply troubled, harboring intense resentment, and capable of extreme actions. Social media posts and private messages revealed a pattern of obsession and fixation that had gone unnoticed until it was too late. At the same time, questions arose about campus security and early warning signs. How had someone so visibly agitated and potentially dangerous been able to approach the university without intervention? Could the tragedy have been prevented? These questions would dominate inquiries for months to come, raising concerns about policy, accountability, and institutional responsibility. But even as answers began to surface, new mysteries emerged. Items found in the suspect's possession hinted at a larger network of communication and planning. Was he acting alone, or were others involved? Were there motives beyond personal grievance? Every discovery seemed to open another layer of complexity, deepening the intrigue and keeping investigators and the public on edge. The nation waited for official statements. The governor held a press briefing, praising law enforcement for their swift action while acknowledging the heartbreak still felt by Charlie Kirk's family and the community. The FBI confirmed ongoing investigations into potential accomplices and motives. Every word was carefully chosen, balancing transparency with caution, aiming to reassure the public while preserving the integrity of the investigation. And then, just as hope seemed to settle over the city, a new revelation shattered that fragile calm. Digital forensics revealed an encrypted message sent minutes before the attack that suggested foreknowledge of the event by another party. Analysts raced to decrypt the message, aware that it could alter the entire trajectory of the investigation. Who else knew about the attack? And how deep did the planning go? The answers would not come easily. And as investigators dove deeper into the digital trails, the psychological profiles, and the physical evidence, one question loomed larger than all the rest. Had they truly apprehended the mastermind, or was the suspect merely a pawn in a much more sinister game? The story, it seemed, was far from over. And just when it appeared that the confrontation had concluded, a twist would emerge that no one saw coming. A twist that would force investigators, the public, and the nation to rethink everything they thought they knew about Charlie Kirk's death. The moment investigators discovered the encrypted message, everything shifted. What had started as a seemingly straightforward manhunt for a lone suspect was suddenly morphing into a complex puzzle, one with pieces scattered across digital devices, private messages, and online platforms. It was a reminder that in today's world, crimes were not just physical. They were digital, invisible until someone knew exactly where to look. Inside a dimly lit room at the FBI's cyber unit, analysts hunched over multiple screens, eyes darting across lines of code, email headers, and metadata. The encrypted message, sent just minutes before the shooting, had been flagged by an AI-driven monitoring system that tracked suspicious activity across thousands of networks. At first glance, it appeared to be gibberish, random strings of numbers and letters, but every analyst knew that was exactly what it was meant to look like. Whoever sent this knew what they were doing, one analyst muttered, tapping keys furiously. The tension in the room was palpable. Every lead mattered. Every second counted. The clock was ticking, and the world outside was waiting for answers. Meanwhile, investigators worked to trace the digital footprint. The suspect's phone, recovered during the arrest, became the central piece of the puzzle. Forensic specialists extracted call logs, text messages, social media interactions, and location data. Patterns began to emerge. Repeated late-night messages to unknown contacts, geotagged photos from locations near the campus days before the attack, and encrypted communications that suggested coordination with someone else. The more they dug, the more troubling it became. There were indications that the suspect had been planning this act for weeks, possibly months. Digital breadcrumbs led to accounts under fake names, encrypted chats in obscure apps, and even anonymous postings on forums that discussed potential vulnerabilities on campus. It was meticulous, deliberate, and frightening in its precision. But then came a discovery that made the room fall silent. A series of messages, partially decrypted, referenced Charlie Kirk by name, specific, targeted, and personal. The language was chilling. Mentions of his routines, his appearances, even notes about times when he might be alone. It wasn't just a random act of violence. This was targeted, planned, calculated. Outside the FBI's cyber labs, the campus community was beginning to process the reality. Students who had seen the man on the roof in previous weeks recalled details they hadn't shared before. One student remembered a conversation where the stranger had seemed to observe the building's entrances with unusual intensity. Another recalled him asking questions about security cameras in vague, offhand ways.